the Messerschmitt Me 262.
You know, it's a question that historians and enthusiasts love to debate. Could a single weapon have actually changed the outcome of World War II? I mean, a piece of tech so advanced, so far ahead of its time, that it could have completely rewritten history. Sounds like science fiction, right?
Well, in 1944, that very question became terrifyingly real for Allied pilots over Europe, because suddenly this thing appeared in the skies, a machine they had never seen before, the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter.
So just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here, the Me 262 could scream through the sky at 900 kilometers per hour. Now compare that to one of the best Allied fighters, the P-51 Mustang, which topped out around 750. That's a 150 kilometer per hour difference. In a dogfight, that kind of speed advantage it's just insane. It's almost an unfair fight.
Okay, so if this thing was such a game changer, why did it only show up so late in the war? That's the big question, right? Well, the answer is, it's complicated. This plane had a really, really troubled birth, filled with technical nightmares and a whole lot of political drama.
This is the Me 262, also known as the Schwalbe, which is German for a swallow. And here's the crazy part. This was not some last-minute, desperate miracle weapon. The design work for this jet actually started way back in 1939, even before the war really kicked off. So what on earth took them so long?
Check out this timeline. It took five full years to get this thing from a blueprint into a battle. I mean, they had a first flight in 41 with a clunky old piston engine strapped to the nose just to test the airframe. Then a real jet-powered flight in 42, but it wasn't until the middle of 1944 that it finally entered service. And that delay, well, it turned out to be absolutely fatal for the program's chances of making a real difference.
And the reasons for that delay? Man, they were huge. First off, the engines. The brand new Jumo 004 jets were a complete nightmare. They were so unreliable, they'd often only last about 25, maybe 35 hours before they had to be totally rebuilt. On top of that, late war Germany was running out of everything, especially the high-temperature metals needed for jet engines. They had to compromise with lower-quality steel, which just couldn't take the heat. But honestly, the biggest problem wasn't a technical one, it was political.
So get this, the Me 262 was born to be a fighter, a pure interceptor, designed specifically to shoot down the Allied bombers that were pounding German cities into rubble. But then, Hitler himself stepped in. He saw this incredible machine and didn't see a defender. He saw a Schnellbomber, a fast bomber. He wanted to use it for revenge attacks. Just think about that. At the very moment Germany's survival depended on defending its airspace, the top leadership crippled its best defensive weapon by trying to turn it into something it was never meant to be. It's a classic and tragic example of bad leadership.
But eventually, the fighter version did make it to the front lines, and when it finally got unleashed, boy was it a storm.
542. That's the number of Allied aircraft that Me 262 pilots claimed they shot down. Now, you always have to take wartime claims with a grain of salt, but there is absolutely no doubt that in the hands of an experienced pilot, this jet was an absolute killing machine.
And it wasn't just propeller planes it outclassed. Let's compare it to the Allies' first jet, the British Gloucester Meteor. The Me 262 was way faster, and its armament? 4 huge 30mm cannons that could shred a bomber in seconds. Even after the war, when the Allies got their hands on them and tested them, the conclusion was unanimous. The German jet was simply in a different league.
But this huge speed advantage created a whole new set of problems for both sides. If you're a German pilot, how do you attack a slow-moving bomber when you're blasting past it at warp speed? And if you're an Allied pilot, well, how in the world do you fight a jet you can't even catch?
The German aces basically had to throw out the old rulebook and invent new tactics on the fly. One of the most famous was the roller coaster attack. They'd come in high, dive straight down through the escort fighters, who couldn't even touch them, then pull up sharply to burn off some speed, and then level out to attack the bombers from behind. It was a really clever solution to a brand new problem.
But, like any new technology, the jet had an Achilles heel. Actually, it had a few. Those powerful engines were really sluggish to respond, which is deadly in a close-in dogfight. But its biggest weakness by far was when it was taking off or landing. At low speeds, it was slow, clumsy, and basically a sitting duck.
And the Allies, being very smart, figured this out fast. This led to their most effective countertactic, something they called the rat scramble. The logic was simple. Why even bother trying to chase these things in the air? That's a waste of time. Instead, as soon as they heard a 262 was taking off, Allied fighters would just race straight for its home airfield. Then they just circle overhead and wait, pouncing on the jets as they came in to land, slow, low on fuel, and completely vulnerable.
So when you put it all together, what's the final verdict on this incredible machine? What was its legacy? Was it really the game-changing weapon everyone feared it would be?
Well, look at this number. Over 1,400 Me-262s were actually built. I mean, think about that. For such an advanced plane, being produced under constant Allied bombing, that's a pretty stunning achievement. But that number is also very, very misleading.
Because the truth is, at any one time, there were fewer than 100 of them actually ready to fight. Why? Well, there was no fuel, there weren't enough trained pilots, and the Allies were constantly bombing their airfields. In the end, the Me-262 was a shark stranded on the beach. It was a terrifying weapon that just couldn't get into the fight. It was simply too little, too late.
And we can't talk about this plane without acknowledging the dark, horrific human cost behind it. To protect the factories from bombs, production was moved into massive underground tunnels, and the labor used to build them, it was slave labor from concentration camps like Gusen II. It's estimated that tens of thousands of people, maybe as many as 50,000, died while being forced to build this aircraft. That is the grim, terrible reality behind the wonder weapon.
But after the war, the Me-262's true legacy really began. The Allies, the Americans, the British, the Soviets, they grabbed every single one they could find and took them apart, studied them intensely. And its innovations, especially those swept-back wings, became the direct blueprint for the next generation of legendary jets. The American F-A-6 Sabre, the Soviet MiG-15, both of those iconic Cold War fighters have the Me-262's DNA all over them.
And if you want a final word on its importance, listen to this. The legendary British test pilot, Captain Eric Brown, a guy who flew more types of aircraft than almost anyone in history, he called the Me-262, quote, the most formidable aircraft of WW2. He said it was a quantum leap beyond anything else in the sky at the time.
And that brings us right back to where we started. What if? What if this incredible machine had shown up in large numbers, not in the summer of '44, but just 1 year earlier? It's one of the biggest and frankly most chilling what-ifs in modern history. Something to think about. Thanks for joining me.